So who am I and why you may want to listen to me? I'm the pioneer of intent healing, a remote healing method where we change the energy and help the person transform their lives as well. And I'm also the founder of Authentic Autism Solutions, and I'm successfully healing children from all over the world who are struggling with the limiting symptoms of autism and ADHD. I'm also the author of the book, How to Heal Autism and ADHD in 30 Days, the phenomenally powerful breakthrough of intent healing. I've also been featured on BuzzFeed as one among 5 professionals to follow in the autism arena. I've also been featured on CNN IBN for a live healing that I did, other media outlets as well. Now, as a medical doctor, I helplessly watched my father suffer due to the side effects of modern allopathic medicine. And toward the end of his life, my father and I discovered the healing power in our own hands. Following that discovery, I saw my father perform healing miracles. That was the moment I gave up my medical practice and embarked upon the uncharted territory of healing with energy and never looked back. My father taught me to truly heal people rather than just treat them the way my medical training had conditioned me to do. A little bit about intent healing. Intent healing is healing with the power of intention by accessing energies prior to consciousness that have the power to erase erroneous cellular memories and conditioning and change the energy pattern in the DNA. These energies rewire the neuronal network in the brain to resonate with optimal well-being and manifesting maximum human potential. I got interested in applying my healing abilities in healing autism when a child with non-verbal autism was referred to me, and he started speaking for the first time in his life when I started doing remote healing sessions for him. The child was in the US and I was doing the healing sessions from India. Now this inspired me to write the book, How to Heal Autism and ADHD in 30 Days, the phenomenally powerful breakthrough of intent healing. And for the first time in the world, my case report about a case of a non-verbal child with autism gaining faculty of speech with applied energy medicine was published in a scientific medical journal. I'm also the regional representative for India for IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was started by Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, which studies science and consciousness. And as a part of the activities of the Chennai community group of IONS, we did a project in a school for special children, children with ADD and ADHD and autism, where the children were taught to do self-healing in the school itself. And after that, I presented a paper at the International Conference on Holistic Enhancement of Learning Potential. The title of the paper was Intent Healing, Breaking New Grounds in Healing Autism, ADD, ADHD and LD, Presenting the Science and Application of Extended Human Capacities.